Opportunity right now to speak with Matt Lamb. He's the associate editor of the College Fix. He has worked with Turning Point USA, Students for Life Action, Students for Life of America, as well as the College Fix. And I guess probably every newspaper at every school you ever went to, you're one of those budding true life journalists, aren't you, Matt?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an interesting story that I brought you on to talk about, because here in the state of Florida, we have a governor who is extremely upfront about his disregard for this whole idea of transgendered procedures done on children, and yet you guys found out something that made me very upset. What was that?
Sure. So the University of Florida has a children's hospital attached to it, connected, affiliated with it, and it actually does transgender procedures, for lack of a better name. So this could include testosterone injections, estrogen injections, as well as surgical procedures, which might include removing ovaries, removing testicles, could include removing breasts. So these are things that, of course, a 15-year-old girl could go in there and have her ovaries removed, and she can never have kids. So if later down the road she changes her mind, realizes that she's just confused and just, wasn't actually a boy, just had a lot going on and has conflicting emotions like all teenagers and really all human beings do, she can't have her ovaries put back in, or men can't have their, testicles put back on so they can have kids. And this is going on at the University of Florida, as well as actually in red states across the country.
Which is startling to me, because I know that the governor has really made a point of saying that children need to be protected. And we are not, look, in the state of Florida, you can't have your ears pierced or get a tattoo under the age of 18, but somehow you can have your breasts or your testicles removed. That's pretty disturbing.
Exactly. And again, these are often not reversible. And so your prefrontal cortex is not developed until you're 24. And honestly, I think sometimes for men, it's probably much later.
Yeah.
And so these things cannot be reversed. Now, the governor's team did tell us that he wants to see these banned across the state. He's I think had an executive order trying to stop state Medicaid dollars from going to this. His different health agencies have released reports warning against this. But currently in the state of Florida, it is still legal for a 16-year-old. They really just generally need one letter from a physician saying that this person is actually the other gender. And that's all it really takes to start getting carved up by University of Florida doctors and others.
I have to ask myself this question, because you're young and I'm on the last stages of life, and you're at the beginning stages of life. How did this sort of idea spread so quickly and so, just it's everywhere? When I was growing up, there was the occasional drag queen. Everyone knew someone who was homosexual, but the idea of someone being gender dysphoric or transgendered, I never even heard of that until I was probably in my 30s or 40s. And now it's like everywhere I turn, 10%, 16%. Is that even possible?
Right. So, it started actually, there was this guy, John Money, I think he was in the 50s or 60s, and he started basically doing these experiments on these two brothers. But I think the growth in this really goes back to, we could look at, the Obergefell v. Hodges a few years ago, that, said that two men and two women can, be the government has to recognize their marriage. That's one place. You could go back to postmodernism and Marxism and nominalism. Really, this idea actually goes all the way back to Gnostic dualism, this idea that you have a body and you have a separate soul. No one really knows what the truth is. It's your own truth. This idea goes back centuries politically in the United States. It really has tied in with the feminist movement, although it wasn't always tied in, the homosexual movement. This whole idea basically that there isn't a way that we're designed, a way that we're created, but that is just whatever kind of you want to do, and men and women and whatever you want to do is fine. And so maybe you could go back to the 60s when this really picked up in the U.S.
Well, yeah, and the idea that it's a social construct, which, last time I checked, I gave birth to a son and a daughter, and it was quite obvious at their birth what gender they were. I didn't construct it. It existed, and the DNA existed right then and there. So it's almost as if there's a faddish nature to this. A dear friend of mine, Abigail Schreier, wrote a book about the craze of transgenderism among teenage girls, where you would have these groups springing up and insisting that they, in fact, were suffering from gender dysphoria. I guess my real question to you, though, is how is it that in a university which receives public funding, something like this can happen? Is this really approved by the taxpayers? I don't think so.
Well, it's allowed to happen because the legislators let it happen. There have been efforts at other states. For example, South Carolina legislators included language in a budget funding for the Medical University of South Carolina that prohibited funds from going to these procedures for kids under 16, which is at least a start. But frankly, I mean, the way I understand it, Florida legislators could basically just attach language to the next budget bill that funds the University of Florida that just says that money won't go to the university if these continue. So how is it allowed to happen is a great question, really, for Florida legislators, really for Florida Republicans, who, if people want to see these things stopped, that would be what would need to happen, and or a law from, I guess, the state, just prohibiting them outright.
Which means that we have to get activated, and it's almost like there are so many issues in front of us that we cannot stay focused on any single issue. And I really believe that this overload is designed. I mean, this is what Rules for Radical was all about, is if you overwhelm the system and you have people fighting so many different battles on so many different battlefields, then chaos takes place. And in chaos, the strongest win. It's just frustrating, and especially to look at it happening on college campuses. What do other college students think about this?
Well, this is, as you kind of mentioned earlier, has really just been accelerated in the past few years. So with the cancel culture and the state of free speech on college campuses, I think a lot of students are afraid to speak up on this. And the real harm in that is not just simply because these students are being silenced. That, of course, is a problem. But it's that no one is telling someone to stop and to think about what they're doing. Because, it could just be that one student in the class who, with the right environment, would be able to warn about these that might stop 5, 6, 7 of their peers from going ahead and getting these injections that can lead to cancer, getting their ovaries removed, as I mentioned, that will make them unable to have kids ever in the future. And so this kind of cancel culture and culture of fear on campuses is, probably stopping people from speaking out, which means more and more people are going to go ahead because they're only hearing this echo chamber of absolutely, if you think you're a woman, you are a woman, or if you think you're a man, you are a man, and go ahead and just go down to Planned Parenthood, which is doing this. Tells you something. I think that the nation's largest abortion vendor is also doing, so-called hormone therapy. And so, yeah, I think a lot of students probably want to speak up against this, but they don't. They're afraid what will happen. We've seen plenty of stories of people who have spoken up against this gender ideology and madness, and what's happened. Abigail Schreier has been canceled, of course, and so hopefully students will speak up against it.
I certainly hope so, because I mean, you can get a story like this transgendered woman that was in a woman's prison and impregnated two inmates, and it'll get very little attention. But it just goes to prove what we've been saying all along, that transgendered male is still a male because he can still function as a male. And just denying that fact or saying it out loud doesn't make it so. It's such a I just think again that we have dropped the ball on giving people the courage to stand up. There was a Senate hearing where Josh Hawley said to a lawyer, the lawyer asked him, can a man get pregnant? And he said, no, a man can't get pregnant. Oh, well, you're transphobic. Now, that means that we're training lawyers in law school these days to not be able to argue and win an argument. Instead, they just immediately call the other person a name and it's supposed to be okay. I'm not transphobic, but I really want some evidence that there is a need for all these surgeries to be done on young children. It's just, does that make me transphobic? I don't think so. I don't think you're transphobic
Yeah,
either,
absolutely.
Matt.
I mean, at least 1 of 9 Supreme Court justices right now Canada woman is. So, they're now at the nation's highest court. And exactly, and you mentioned the professor from Berkeley who had made those statements. And so that's, students in her class aren't going to be free to stick up and speak out against it.